All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, William Pullin. I'm not sure you count as a guest. You're a fellow, you're like the stepchild of Radio Wasteland.
I like that role. That role.
You're allowed to dinner, but you have to eat at the breadboard. It's like...
Okay, I can do it. I can deal with that.
Slightly abusive. How are you handling this situation there in Texas? Are you guys... is there some back and forth on the opening up on the situation?
Yeah, there is. Like anything else, it goes down political lines, which is completely illogical.
Right.
So that's the way it is. So the state's slowly opening up. Greg Abbott, who's our Republican governor, is actually pretty cautious. I like his approach. He's doing it slowly. So. I don't agree with his political beliefs, but the way he's doing it is slow and cautious and measured, and I think that's a good thing. So,
regardless of one's political beliefs, I like to think that most people don't want to go down in history as somebody who killed a lot of people. So it's like that's a great motivating factor. It's like I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, I think most governors, whether they're Republican or Democrat right now, are pretty on the ball. But there have been a couple who really haven't been, like Jack Kemp in Georgia, and so they kind of stick out, right? But I think most people are legitimately trying to protect their citizens and their state.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we could be worse. We could have who's that guy you like so much, Kara? Bolsonaro.
God.
Oh.
We basically have Bolsonaro. We just also have like checks and balances and stuff. The reason Bolsonaro is bad is because he's in Brazil, which has much weaker institutions.
Right.
But he's basically just a Trump clone, Trump.
Well,
pretty much. Yep.
Speaking of governments, our topic tonight that we're talking about is basically the release of the UFO videos that we have seen most of, but before it was leaked, and now the Pentagon has straight up come out and said, yes, this is us. Is that right, William?
Yes. Yeah. Before it was, the videos were released a few years ago through the ATIP program. The name attached to that is Lou Elizondo. But just recently, the Pentagon officially released them. And it's been confirmed that the videos are real, which to my mind, means they're simply not hoaxed. They haven't told us what's on the videos. They remain unidentified. So it's interesting. From my point of view, what's most interesting is the fact that they're released at all. Not so much what's on them or what isn't on them. The fact that they're comfortable enough actually giving us something that they admit is unidentified is interesting in and of itself, regardless of what's actually on there.
Yeah, well, before we start trying to figure out why they would release it, which is like probably my biggest question, can one of you two remind me what they said when they did release it? What context did they put that out in? Did they just say, yeah, that's us and that's it? Or, what was the context of them putting it out?
You want to take that, Kara, or should I do that?
Oh, you should do it. My memory doesn't stretch past last Tuesday. I don't know what day it is. I don't know where I am. So
mine goes barely a week past that point. Well, the Pentagon, they confirmed that the videos are real. They're enamored with the acronym UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, which everyone seems to think is a new acronym, but that appeared in the 50s. It just it wasn't embraced like the term UFO was. It's been around, but not really in society circles. Not just certain people in the UFO community were aware of that acronym. But beyond that, they really haven't said much about them other than they are unidentified aerial phenomena. That's about it.
So they just pretty much came out and verified, hey, this leaked information, yeah, that came from us. It was leaked not by us, but from us.
Yeah, agreed. Yes, that's what happened. The Pentagon themselves didn't release it. It was leaked through the ATIP program, and then the Pentagon recently re-released. Sounds like a classic metal album. It was a re-release, and then and then under the guise that this is the stuff that the sources are. We're the source of it, and we're actually officially releasing what's our content. It belongs to us, i.e., the taxpayers. But we have no right to see it. But but beyond that, we just don't know. I mean, they're not. It's great. It's not hoax videos. We have enough of those.
Yeah.
Around.
Yeah.
I mean, YouTube is basically a source for that. But beyond that, that's all we know. So back at square one, kind of.
It's just weird because, as you said, as the taxpayers, they don't tell us, blah, blah, blah. I agree with you. There's a lot of stuff that they aren't telling us. And some of that stuff may be justifiably so. I don't know. I'm not in the business of fighting and killing, so maybe there is some reasoning behind some of it. I don't know. But it prompts the question of, why would they fess up to this one? Because the immediate thought is like, oh, people are panicking over the videos, so we need to fess up so that people stop panicking. But I mean, to fess up and say, yeah, that's what you think it is. Good luck. It's like,
yeah.
What possibly could be the motivation behind that? And this one, I'm not necessarily throwing directly at you, William. This is kind of a roundtable question because it's totally speculative, but I don't know. What do we think the motivations are behind that? I'll start with you, William, but Kara, I'm going to want to know what you think it is next.
I've discussed it at length. It was about a few months after the initial leak happened. And we really didn't know who specifically released them. We found out it was a leak, and later on, now the Pentagon released it. But I spoke with a few researchers about it, friends that I hold in high regard, and they were wondering if an event transpired. Something happened that the public is not privy to, is unaware of, that would have precipitated a change in the way they do things. That's a possibility. I mean, certainly. But beyond that, the content of the videos, to me, is not really groundbreaking. They're still unidentified.
Right.
And, of course, likely they are either military apparatus or something along those lines. The likelihood of them being actually alien constructs is low, like everything else in this field. But it's a possibility. But the why is usually not asked. And I tend to think something precipitated a change, which that may not mean it was an event. Another way to look at it is this: the government/military really doesn't do anything to release stuff to the public unless it's advantageous for them to do so.
Yes.
There's something to be gained. Yeah, especially if you're in the government. And politicians don't do anything if they have to pay a price. Right. They only make moves if it's something to be gained from them on a personal or political level. So, but the why question is interesting, and I think it's not been asked enough. So,
I see.
What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe the cause of this isn't that the military is being less rational than we assume. Like, I think we always think of the military as very sober-minded, very, transactional, very results-oriented, and I think they are, but the military as an institution also has a history of monkeying about with some pretty strange ideas, remote viewing, they try a lot of stuff, right? And they, a lot of times, especially when it comes to like PSYOP stuff, they're sort of throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. So my thought seeing this was maybe this is part of some complicated scheme to manipulate the public or foreign governments that is actually probably too complicated to actually work, but it sounded good in a boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe the government is trying something and it doesn't make sense to us because it's actually not a good idea.
Right.
But they're doing it anyway because that's kind of what they do.
Yeah, putting the two of what you guys are saying together, I hadn't really thought of what William said, and putting it together with what you say, it actually kind of seems like potentially the same thing, and that is that like some sort of event occurred and they jumped the gun trying to get out in front of it. Is kind of a possibility, like, hey, or spinning off of what Kara just said, maybe in a world where arguably private sector technology in certain areas is arguably beyond some of the government stuff, or they wouldn't be going after big tech companies like Google to help with data and stuff like that. Maybe the idea is if we can get this anecdotal sort of evidence out there, we can collect more or get more insight from. If we add a little bit of credibility to this, maybe we can get other things with credibility to come forward with some information that they have. But
that's a strong possibility, because the UFO topic in general suffers from a lack of credibility.
Right.
It's viewed as a pseudoscience. You have an image of this tinfoil hat pseudoscientist walking around dressed as an alien investigating UFOs. It's not respected by the fellow scientists. And I get that, and that's our own fault, the way researchers conduct themselves and the UFO community in general. And that term may not really be applicable here, but and the other thing that's interesting is that the public is easily misled. We're inundated with data. We're inundated with links and stories from all these sources, a lot of which is just fake, misinformation, or disinformation. But people are easily distracted. So this could be just window dressing to get our eye off the ball. Because I know a lot of researchers in this field are focused on this problem, and it gets our eye off the actual target, which is, what are these things? What's in our skies? Are they extraterrestrial? Are they not? What's the explanation? And all this window dressing we lose our focus as a result of it. So I rarely discuss this on my blog page or my group, if at all, because it kind of distracts to a point. It should be addressed, certainly, but it's like trying to find out who kidnapped a young woman, but trying to figure out what he's wearing. It's not really pertinent to the case. It can distract you. And this is kind of it. We have these videos. We want to know why. These are all important issues, but it kind of can distract us from the idea of, or the concept of, okay, where the videos came from is interesting. These questions need to be asked. But the most important one is, what's on the videos? What is that flying in the sky that our own pilots couldn't identify?
Right.
So that happens too. So.
Right. And, I assume that you've put a little more, starting from what you were saying, understanding data, you follow UFO and extraterrestrial data. We all follow different types of data. With my job, I follow data, but, I don't know. This is just part of my frustration with the world and our government on the whole. And it's not a right or a left argument. It's that I don't mentally have time to figure out the economy and figure out race relations in this country and figure out what UFOs are and stuff like that. We elect people, and part of my problem is, here we're in this COVID thing. All right, I'm going to go off about something totally off topic. Sorry. This is my most frustrating thing about this COVID thing, that nobody's paying attention to. But I do think it kind of applies to the way the government deals with these things. And that is, here we have our president, and we can blame Trump all we want, but Trump isn't the first problem to ever be in the government. And they're basically saying, oh, well, states need to take care of this, and we need to take care of that, and we're here for backup, but, we're not providing testing. We're not going to do this, that, and the other thing. I personally am a small business owner, and last year, living in California, I paid $200 in taxes to the state of California and $8,000 to the federal government. So basically, the federal government is taking my $8,000. The state is getting my $200, and the government is basically saying, "Oh yeah, you states figure it out." I mean, if that's the case, shouldn't my $8,000 go to my state?
Yes.
Are you going to join the? Are you going to join the California separatists and stuff and start demanding that we?
I'm an Oregonian now, but
okay. We can the whole West Coast can just.
Right. But I mean, if it's up to my state to figure all this stuff out, shouldn't that be where my resources go? And so this is where a big disconnect in the government is. And I think kind of with what Kara was saying about the motivations, and that is ultimately, there's just maybe there's just too many chefs in the kitchen.
True.
You know, and that's why these things are getting let out, because one chef is letting it go, the other isn't. They're, you know, but of course, that's the problem with government. If you only have one chef in the kitchen, you don't have a democracy. So.
I mean, recent events the last couple of decades have shown that governmental agencies don't communicate with each other. There's a discourse there. There's actually competition between them, which is preposterous. When you want to keep a secret, at least in the military, you compartmentalize it. So no one person knows all the details. You have two individuals working in separate rooms, and neither one knows what the other is working on. So what the result of that is that no one whistleblower can come forward and blow the whole game up. They can't. But it also results in the idea that one individual might work on their own and release something which is enough to pique our interest, but doesn't portray the entire picture. And that's a possibility here. I mean, maybe one person decided to release these videos who works at the Pentagon, but did not consult with or discuss this move with anyone else who may be privy to other information too. I mean, the government is very inefficient, especially the higher up you go. Once you get past the states, because even with this issue, the governments of the states are doing a far better job than the federal government. Yet somehow most of our money goes to the feds. That makes no sense. But the higher up you go generally in government, or any organization at times, it becomes more and more troublesome and less efficient. In the UFO field, my mind immediately goes to Moulton. The local chapters do some great work, but the higher up in the organization you go, the less efficient it is, and the more problems crop up that aren't addressed. So it kind of goes along with your thoughts about your money going where it's not being used for you. I mean, they're asking the states to help you, but your resources aren't going there.
Right. You know, and I think a lot of businesses in general, and the government, to some degree runs like a business, although, a lot of people here, especially over the last 6 years, have had the attitude that a government should be run more like a business. And I say no, because, bottom line for business is profit, and that shouldn't be nowhere near the purpose of a government. But, but a lot of businesses have that problem that once you hit the 50,000-foot view, that's why everybody hates their boss, because they don't understand. Everybody gets mad and they're just all, oh, my boss didn't understand what I'm doing. So you get lost. Another thing that, that we were going to talk about that before I went off on my frustration with the world is, how much information are we really able to glean from these videos? I don't know anything about aviation, anything more than a couple of G.I. Joe toys when I was a kid. So when I'm looking at those videos, there's obviously like lines and sites on the video to help us understand how large it is, how fast it's going, stuff like that. I assume that's what those lines are for. How much information did we really pull from this? Do we know how big they were? Do we know how fast they were going? I mean, is it possible that it really was just sort of a misdiagnosed drone?
I did my broadcast today's Friday. 2 days ago, there was my Carakitric memory for me. 2 days ago, I had a broadcast, and I had a researcher come on, and he confirmed what I think, and they're not drones, which does not mean they're alien. They're simply not drones, because drones generally don't exhibit flight characteristics that are above and beyond the capabilities of manned aircraft. In other words, you wouldn't accept a drone to be able to keep up with, say, an F-16. That'd be unreasonable.
Right. Well, that's what I'm first getting at. When we look at it, my understanding is so limited that I don't look at it and automatically go, oh, yeah, that's something an aircraft could never do. I just see something flying by, and they're sort of tracking it and following it and saying, whoa, what is that? It's going fast. But, have we analyzed that to the point where we can say, yeah, that thing is going fast, and that thing should not be able to do that?
Researchers and some of which are not in this field really, more highly qualified than I am, have made the determination that, this thing was displaying characteristics that were above and beyond what we can attain now, which still might suggest secret apparatus, military apparatus. We all know that things have been developed and aren't known to the public for decades after that. So after they become operational. So there's data on the video that can be analyzed, and I haven't been able to. I'm not privy to looking at that kind of stuff. But from a standpoint of the way the pilots were vocalizing their emotions, the way they were reacting, when you listen to the audio in some of these videos, these pilots who are highly trained military personnel were reacting like they were seeing something that they had never seen before. They were thrown away. They were blown away by the speed and maneuverability of what they were witnessing, which some people will immediately go to alien. They immediately make that jump.
Right.
And could it be that? Certainly it could be. Likely, probably not. I mean, but it makes more sense from a researcher standpoint to embrace and investigate the more likely explanation before you get to the exotic, which means military apparatus, misidentification, something terrestrial in nature other than something from 44 light years away. So, but yeah, researchers that are more highly trained in certain specific disciplines have looked at the video, and it's suggestive of something unidentified that is not a drone. So that's about as far as they've gone so far. So,
So is it possible that this is like a U.S. experimental craft? The pilots didn't know what they were seeing, and then later other countries maybe somehow found out about this experimental program, and we release these videos as sort of cover to say like, oh, we don't know what these are either.
That's where my gut's taking me. So this is military apparatus that's secret. I mean, maybe a black ops program or something to that effect. And to something that the pilots weren't privy. There was knowledge that they had no clearance to see. So they might have witnessed something that is experimental, is not operational yet, but they're unaware of it. Therefore, its capabilities, which would logically be a little more kind of out there as opposed to technology we know about, they wouldn't know what they were seeing. So by definition, that's unidentified. I think that's more likely than anything else. So I'm kind of comfortable saying that. And then I think it's probably ours, because I can't logically think of a reason why a country would fly their experimental aircraft over their enemy's airspace. That makes no sense. So I think that explanation we can throw out pretty definitively.
Yeah, without us raising much more of a stink than just admitting that we don't know what it is. And what Kara just said proposes the flip side of what she was just saying, and that is, in this world of media warfare, maybe we were sending a warning to another country.
Yeah, it's possible.
By showing them, hey, look, these jets that we got that you're thinking that you can compete with, we have something that our own jets can't even compete with,
Yeah.
So.
And we live in a world where information travels around the world instantaneously. So it's not like 1960 where we couldn't really directly influence what the Soviets were thinking by exposing or showing them some technology we had, because it took time for that news to reach them. Now, everything's instantaneous. So the minute those videos hit the internet, poof, everybody knew.
Right.
That's a possibility. You could that scenario you just described could reasonably be done in 2 seconds, and let it go from there. So.
Yeah. So in these videos and in the community, basically in the UFO community, mostly, I've heard it referred to as one of them as the Tic Tac video, and stuff like that. So Tic Tac, immediately makes me wonder about size. And, this was kind of following my other question earlier about the speed and relation. Do we really have any grasp of how big it is? I'm under the impression that it's not big enough to be manned.
Yeah, that's the impression I have too. Yeah, it's not large enough of a structured object to have a crew. It seems to suggest something operating remotely,
right,
or on its own, but it's not manned. It's on automatic or something. So yeah, that's the impression I get too. That it's not of a substantial enough size to have people, or I should say people, I gotta include the extraterrestrial because it's possible you don't have any occupants operating the object. So that seems to suggest it's not very substantial inside. What that means, I have no idea. But it's interesting, yeah.
So we've been talking about this, as it's a some black ops craft or whatever, and I think I agree with you. I think that's the most likely explanation. My question is this sighting similar to UFO sightings from the past? From decades past when the U.S. might not have had the capability to create things like this.
There's a few sightings, quality sightings in the books that describe structured craft operating with flight characteristics that are pretty beyond what we could attain at the time. Craft that weren't very large, which would again suggest something unmanned. But one of these cases is from August of 1956, which is pre-drone era, clearly.
Yeah, very far before drones.
The Rendlesham Forest event of December 1980, which was a landed object. Again, the size of it suggested something unmanned. So there are some quality events that have been reported that feature structured objects that weren't very large in proportion. So there's kind of an analogy with what's happening now. But I'm more comfortable, if I had to make the jump to the extraterrestrial, I would be more comfortable doing it with those cases.
Right.
Because a drone-like craft flying at tens of thousands of miles an hour in 1956 would more strongly suggest extraterrestrial. If you had a fast-flying craft now, we've advanced since then. 2020, it's more likely military apparatus. So, but there are some distinct similarities with past cases. Yeah,
that's interesting.
So is the in the past, a lot of these situations, like we've had you on to discuss Roswell before. It might be fun to have you on to discuss Rendlesham, which is up and coming as being one of those names that people pull from their mind as being one of the big ones. In the past, when these things happen, there is a fervor that goes through the UFO community, like, hey, something's happening. And now I'm not really feeling that from the UFO community now. Is that because it's so diluted by the mainstream, or are they not so invested in this one?
I think it's more the mainstream is being diluted. You're right. It's not this out of control fervor to embrace this case, whatever the explanation. Mm-hmm. There's been no real rush to take up positions that aren't supported by the data. It hasn't been like that. Roswell, Rendlesham Forest, the Phoenix Lights event, a few other cases are the elephants in the room. They take up all the air.
Yeah, Phoenix Lights was a problem.
Would there have been room for another one? Yeah, I don't know, but it hasn't really. That hasn't happened with these videos. Could that be because they're simply videos? There's no concrete sighting of people on the ground, or it's a different situation. That's possibly it, but I tend to agree with you that it's a result of the media, the mainstream media, covering their release, as opposed to Roswell was covered by the media for 24 hours before it was debunked, or it was explained away by the military. An explanation that doesn't hold up. The Rendlesham Forest event was covered by the British national media and still is to this day. So that's a little different. But most of the cases are covered in a very quickly, maybe a calendar day, and then they're forgotten because it's a UFO case. It's not really embraced as being anything groundbreaking or should be covered to that extent. But this one, and plus there's so many other media outlets.
Right.
And before it was CBS, NBC, ABC, and that was it. Now you have only a few channels on cable and other platforms to cover this. So it's spread out over all those channels. I think that may explain why there's no fervor around this scenario.
Well, if they tried tweeting about it, apparently you can put some crazy ass shit up there, and people seem to care.
Yeah. They do. The Twitter wars in the UFO community are crazy, insane.
Bad.
Which is the reason why I'm not on Twitter.
Yeah.
I just have no time to deal with people conducting themselves in uncouth, unreasonable ways. I just won't deal with that. But people like that kind of interaction. But it's on Twitter is just insane. I mean, Facebook has its moments. It does, but you can kind of control the narrative a little bit. You can block people, and there's ways you can work around that. Twitter it seems like a little more of a free for all. So it's pretty crazy.
Twitter is just a very bad platform to have like a reasonable, cogent conversation. You're limited in characters. You can't really deal with trolls in any way. It's pretty much just people hurling zingers at each other until one side goes away. Yeah,
I found that on Facebook you're able to back down a little bit, and people will say, "Oh, okay, let's reset." People are a little more willing to reset, but it's like the amount. I took I went to a social media marketing seminar. For the audience out there, that's part of what I do for a living. It has nothing to do with Radio Wasteland. Andrea is our social media person, not me. But
glad we cleared that up.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be locked into the world of marketing the paranormal or anything. I don't really do that. But in this seminar, they referred to Facebook as being like a conversation in a coffee shop, and Twitter to being like a conversation in a bar. And I definitely see that, because it's short and it's loud and you're just trying to cut in, cut out and move on, follow a topic,
And everyone's drunk and looking for a fight.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. It's that attitude of it's Friday night, it's time to blank or fight, So Twitter seems to very much have that attitude.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, which, regardless of the topic, it's nothing positive comes from that kind of conversation. Nothing productive. You can't have a cordial discussion with somebody who has a different point of view if you're attacking each other. It doesn't work that way. So,
well, I was explaining to my son the other day. He was talking about arguing with his friends and other people his age and stuff, and I'm just all, well, look at those arguments. Literally 99 out of 100 times that an argument is happening, they're about opinions, not facts. That's what people are arguing about. Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming up on break here. You're listening to William Pullin here on Radio Wasteland. Stick around. Come on back. Do all that stuff. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, William Pullin. We're talking about UFOs, specifically the UFO videos confirmed by the Pentagon to be from the Navy. But, William, we always talk about UFOs in general, and I got to ask, on a UFO level, all this work that ufologists are doing and uncovering and digging for, are we really getting anywhere?
No.
All right, show's over.
And,
you heard it here first.
And that is not true. There are some fine quality researchers that have done some great work as best they can. But we need more highly qualified people. We need to have this field viewed in a scientific way. That way, qualified individuals from other disciplines, meaning scientists, would take a look at this stuff and really look at it. The scientific method is not used when researching this stuff. So that's an issue. That's a problem. And then there's too much discord. There's dysfunctional. The community is dysfunctional. If you take a group of scientists or doctors or archaeologists or what have you, in a very general way, they all get along. There's not this severe discourse going on within their own community. The UFO community, you can't say that. You can't say that. A lot of people just don't get along. There's some questionable individuals in the community that don't really help the cause much. So we've been looking at this stuff since the mid-1940s.
Sure.
Whether it's the military, civilian efforts, and really, we have no answers as to what's going on in the skies above us. And that's unfortunate. I don't know if that speaks to the strangeness of this phenomenon, or speaks to the level of, or the quality of the research being done. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure there's something about the weirdness factor, that brings in a level of fantasy that is hard to filter out. It's the whole, throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's so much fantasy that maybe we're throwing out some stuff that's important. And then, a couple of weeks ago, we had a friend of yours on, NK,
Yep.
and you just brought up the scientific method. She kind of at least conveyed to me somewhat, I don't want to put her in a box that maybe she doesn't exist in, but kind of felt like the scientific method, or at least a method that MUFON was using, was limiting the information and stories that were coming in and leading people. But at the same time, I played devil's advocate in the argument and said, well, we need to have these things in order to quantify, so, how do we balance this out? I guess, how do other disciplines balance this out? And can we apply that to how we balance it out?
Just to be clear, I don't think she was really coming down on the scientific method.
I don't think so either. But
I think she was saying MUFON's method for interviewing people was a bad way of dealing with trauma survivors, basically.
I'm completely in agreement with Nikita. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What MUFON is conducting, the way they're doing things, is not scientific. It isn't. There's this idea that there's a push in the UFO community that's, one, anti-science, two, a good friend of mine who's a researcher, I'm quoting him as saying, "Thou shalt not doubt the experiencer." And people are reporting. People are honest, intelligent people reporting these anomalous events they can't identify. That does not. It's unreasonable to think they're all identifying or seeing alien spacecraft. That's unreasonable. But they should still be treated with respect and a level of common courtesy. But having said that, what MUFON is doing is they've been a great data collection agency since they came into existence back in '69, a few years ago. But are they conducting scientific investigations? I would say no. You look at the way science is done, you're looking at chemistry, physics, disciplines like that. What is conducted in the UFO community does not resemble that in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't. So she's exactly right. And what's happening is that because of that level of that unfocused, somewhat unprofessional approach, what happens is that witnesses to anomalous events are less comfortable coming forward and giving their testimony, which means a truly anomalous, potentially extraterrestrial event may fall through the cracks because it's not brought forward, and that's unfortunate too. So she's doing the best. She's doing some outstanding work here in San Antonio and in the area, trying to collect testimony in an objective, non-leading manner.
Right.
When I discuss things with the UFO witness, when someone comes forward with their story with me, I never ask them questions. I simply ask them, describe all the details of your event. What happened? Because any question I ask potentially could lead them in one direction or the other. And I don't want to do that.
Right.
So she's exactly right. Yeah, it's a troubling situation, which leads to the whole idea of this whole field conducting itself in a pseudo-scientific way as opposed to a scientific way.
Right.
And that's certainly a troubling problem.
Yeah, well, I definitely didn't want to misrepresent her. I liked what she had to say, and I forget what word she used. She used it. She used some word that basically defined her, instead of being a researcher, as a curator of stories. And I forget. She used a specific word that worked perfectly for it. And a what?
A chronicler?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
I've seen the word. Yeah. Yeah, that's what she's doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and and I definitely like the idea, and of course there's definitely take a look at anthropology and stuff like that. Of course, there were the people going in, the anthropologists and the archaeologists going in to study civilizations, but some were just trying to collect the stories, and one of those romantic views of my life of what it could have been would be like the National Geographic guys taking a single reel recorder and going into the Appalachian Mountains and trying to record as much music as possible before it was gone. I mean, I get this and I get its necessity and stuff like that, but to create bell curve specifics like the way that space and ancient history work, it's not necessarily something that you can create and recreate in a lab. So it's the other side of science where you basically have to collect data and factor out the impossibles. And MUFON, I feel, is the closest thing we have to doing that. But I also don't know anything about MUFON other than
I can kind of embrace that idea. The trouble is from a you look at the business world, when you have one company that controls let's say there's a company that makes masks of all things. If that one company controls the entire the whole situation, that's not good for the consumer. There's no reason for that company to do quality control on of itself. It doesn't police itself. That's what we have in the UFO Research Committee. We have the National UFO Reporting Center that Peter Davenport runs. That's a data collection agency. That's not an investigative group. And then there's MUFON, with everything else in the room. NICAP is folded. AFRO is folded. MUFON is the only group in town. I think that's not a good thing because that's a monopoly. There's no other group that challenges them, that forces them to increase or raise their standards of investigation to a higher level.
Yeah, I forgot about Peter Davenport too, and I always like him because he just sort of they come into his website and then he calls them later. So the initial information and of course, like any other nerd, I frequent myself some coast to coast, and I really like it when he's on there, and I really like him. I forgot about him. I should follow that a little more.
Yeah. No, in my humble opinion, and I'm very comfortable saying I might be dead wrong, it's a two-pronged attack. You have to use science to explain if you have a case with physical traces, radiation traces, landing marks, physical evidence you can all embrace and come to a consensus about. That's when you can apply science. Then there's the other aspect of this where people are reporting anomalous events, and we all know that individuals are not the greatest observers at all. I mean, you ask any law enforcement official, when they drive up to the scene of a car wreck, they'll interview 10 people about what happened 10 minutes after the event, and they get 10 different explanations. So people are not the greatest, they're not the most accurate, objective observers. Having said that, that's not all we have at this point. So it has to be a collection of quality testimony firsthand, ideally testimony that's collected relatively quickly after the event transpired, not months or years after the fact. That's not good enough. Combine that with a scientific examination of any physical evidence that's collected. And both those aspects are dependent on witnesses coming forward quickly and investigators getting to the site quickly to gather evidence before it disappears. So we're against the clock. But most sightings either don't get reported at all or they get reported far after the fact. And that's not good enough.
Right.
No.
Do you feel that there is a change in people's willingness to report their sightings, though? Historically, I feel like people maybe hid it because of fear of social oppression on some level. Some of that, maybe, is that going away?
I think so. I think the majority of UFO researchers are aware that most UFO sightings go unreported. I think that's still the case, although that percentage is not so skewed nowadays. I think people are more comfortable coming forward. And I think the media has a lot to do with that. There's so many avenues covering this topic. People are a little more comfortable coming forward, not fearing being made fun of or being ridiculed. So that's a good thing from that point of view. And that can move the field forward. Because the media is covering this field in a more legitimate way than it had, say, prior to about 5 years ago, that may precipitate a change in perception from the scientific point of view. In other words, the scientific community might look at this field in a little more legitimate light, which means they might be more comfortable actually looking at what's going on and take a look at that. And it's illogical to not try to find qualified people to look at this stuff. We need to have more qualified people look at this and try to find some answers. So in a roundabout way, the media might be our best friend.
Interesting.
Right. A lot of people are going to argue with that one.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they will.
No, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, they will. But if the field's covered in a better way by journalists, by quality journalists, that's only a good thing, as opposed to the way it used to be covered, where it appeared on the news in a very tongue-in-cheek way with X-Files teams covering the story, and it's not taken seriously. Right. Well, that's not going to move the field forward. That's not any help at all. But if you do have the New York Times or other reputable journalistic establishments covering this topic in a serious way, that's only a good thing. And so I guess I'm kind of trying to explain what I just said, because I'll probably get some emails tonight.
Right. Well, it's like, journalists, quality journalists, I can't help but to think of Linda Moulton Howell, who started out as a reputable journalist and who eventually went to all entirely fringe news. And I wonder if she did it because she had to or because she was compelled to, if her interest in that sort of made any other news reporting not an option for her, or how that worked.
I'm very troubled with her approach. I'm not comfortable at all. You're right. She went from being a reputable journalist with a high level of integrity that was held in high regard by a lot of other journalists. That's not the case now. She's embraced a lot of fringe topics, a lot of indefensible theories that can't be proven or disproven, a lot of ideas that aren't based in data but based in belief. And we all have our own beliefs, and that's a non-starter. That's a given. But on some level, when you're examining an issue that's unknown, whether it's UFOs or anything else, at some level you have to put your personal beliefs aside and ask yourself, what can we prove? What do we know? Do we have any data to even support my personal beliefs? If we don't, that's a question that needs to be addressed. But when you have a journalist or anybody else making claims that aren't supported by data in any way, shape, or form, that's not good. That is not an ideal situation at all.
Yeah. I don't really know I don't know much about this person, but I think being a journalist or a scientist or whatever can be a really thankless job, and I think it's unsurprising that some people decide to cash out on their reputations by telling people what they want to hear, but it's from a scientist or a journalist or whatever. Take the lady who did the pandemic video. She has scientific training, she should be very qualified in the field, but also she was disgraced in the scientific field and is now making fringe stuff because that's how she gets her money now.
And the other thing that happens is that if you make false claims that aren't supported by data in the scientific community, and those claims are proven false, and your lack of data is shown to be, that situation is exposed, you were expelled from the UFO community. For the scientific community.
Right. Your career ending.
Your lack of integrity you're held accountable for that. In the UFO field, that never happens. Never.
Right.
You can make random claims that are not supported by data at all, and you become popular. What I found in this field, and this is just from personal experience, is that if you get pushback, negative pushback, for not embracing everything, for being a little more dogmatic about finding out, what's really going on, not embracing everything, that tends to mean that person has a level of integrity and they're not simply embracing everything. I find it gratifying when I get negative emails. It means I'm doing my job. That means I'm making people think.
Right.
And if I embrace everything, well, that doesn't do us any good. So I just won't do that.
This whole conversation has reminded me of another part of this world that enrages me. And that is the world's dwindling vocabulary. I listen to a lot of talk radio, and a lot of it's conservative talk radio, and I'm listening to Mark Levin. And Mark Levin is, I
think I found your problem.
Yeah.
He's sitting there crapping on Chuck Todd. And he's talking about how Chuck Todd's not a journalist and blah, blah, blah. He's doing this, that, and the other thing, and he's no journalist. You know how he talks. And like, I'm thinking to myself, Chuck Todd's show is called Meet the Press, where the press comes in and talks about their opinions. I mean, that's what the show is. It's not really journalism. It's not really news.
No.
And then you have Mark Levin, who's sitting there just talking about his opinion the whole time. And that's not really news. And we have a bunch of people who both think that they're news, crapping on the other one.
Neither of them are news.
When neither of them are news.
Yeah.
And,
they're pundits. They're not journalists.
Right. And
journalists are a dying breed. You can find some working for the major newspapers. That's kind of where they are now.
Right. And so it's hard to support something that that one doesn't even know the term to apply to them. We're all sitting here and we're throwing this word scientist and when I say we, I mean society. We're throwing this word scientist at people who aren't journalists, at people who aren't journalists, at people who are opinions where they're not. It's like everything is just so incredibly confusing, and nobody's really getting anywhere. And I guess that's the end of my rant. It's very frustrating.
Yes, it is. And add that to the fact that people embrace everything. They don't bother to check for another source. They see a link on the internet. They see a story from some source, and they don't bother to look if there's another source. They don't check to see if the information is valid.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that and we accept invalid content as real, then fake becomes truth. And we see that in the political realm all the time. And now that's bled into the UFO field, where people think that Alexander the Great saw UFO when he was conquering Persia. No, he didn't. That came out in a 1950s novel. That's fiction. People think that Eisenhower signed a treaty with the aliens in the 50s. There's not one iota of evidence to prove that at all. It's a story. Hoax cases that have been proven to be hoaxed on multiple occasions by different researchers that have nothing to do with each other. Somehow these cases have a life of their own. They're legends. They're embraced. Well, if we're going to embrace the invalid, well, no wonder we're laughed at as a field.
Yeah.
By the outside world.
Kara brings on every couple of months a story about David Meade talking about the end of the world, and it always perplexes us.
To be fair, that guy doesn't even pretend to be a scientist.
Well, no, but the question is, how many times do you get to cry wolf until people are just going to be like, whatever, guy?
This is a guy who's predicted that the world's going to end, a couple of months from now on some specific date, every few months for like 5 years. And he still gets media coverage.
Right.
Sure.
At this point, I think people are just like, it's funny that he's doing it, but it's kind of sad too, because there are people who still believe him somehow.
Right. Well, we're at this toss-up between the need of sensationalism to get a message out, and the boringness of reality.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the end. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you about to say something, William?
No, it's in the UFO field. You keep hearing this is the year of disclosure. I've heard that every year since 1984.
Oh yeah,
never happened. But people keep buying it. They keep buying tickets to conferences, hoping this will happen. It never does. So same thing, cry wolf. But in this field, you keep crying wolf, and they keep buying it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the end here. I did want to say that I hope you had a nice birthday. I caught some of it on the Facebook of your responsible, small gathering, social distancing birthday.
Yes, 6 feet apart. And we each had our own cooler, so we enjoyed ourselves. A little bit of early 70s metal with
nice.
Going on stuff.
Seemed to be quite a Judas Priest marathon.
It was. We did the first 6 albums, and that's pretty good,
That's commitment, man. That's commitment.
Yeah.
All right, William. Well, it's great to have you on. If you're interested in finding out more about William, his group on Facebook is UFO Real, a historical review. That's correct, right? I got that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you can search up William Pullin, Pullin, and I am sure that you will find him. Thank you very much for being on.
Thanks for having me again. You guys take care.
All right. Looking forward to having you again.